Good evening all and welcome. Tonight's video has been graciously sponsored by Horror Escape London, an amazing escape room experience if you dare. But for now, a little clip of what might be in store.
Welcome to Horror Escape, the UK's premier immersive horror. Race against the clock blindfolded before you're eaten for dinner. Horror Escape.
As you can see, it's pretty epic and all horror based. I'm sure most of you will probably absolutely love it, as me and my friends did the other week. Feel free to check them out, link in the description, and don't forget that you get 20% off using discount code MORT20. Hope you have fun. But for now it's time to get comfortable as we head underground and let the darkness take control. I find and explore haunted locations and urban legends in Japan. A lot of the places are hyped up in hopes of tourism or a spot of fame on television. And some are a friend of a friend who knew someone's experience, which seems more true depending on how many drinks you've had. Most of the urban legends are similar to Western stories or are more silly than terrifying. Tunnels, on the other hand, almost always have something very unsettling about them. If ever something goes wrong with equipment, a mind-numbing feeling of despair takes hold of my gut, or something is seen lurking in the distance, it's almost always in a tunnel. The creepiest experience I've had is when I was exploring a haunted tunnel in the mountains between Shizuoka and Aichi. I was taking photos of the area, and there was something very obviously standing on the other side of the tunnel. It was like two dark masses, which would sometimes dart from one side of the entrance wall to the other. Not to be deterred, my friends and I walked into the tunnel with our torches and backpacks. We reached halfway before the torches shut off in some sort of electrical failure. Suddenly, from the other side of the tunnel, which had become very, very dark without torchlight, I could hear something sprinting towards us. I panicked, turned, and found the rest of my friends had already begun rushing back towards the entrance we had entered from. On the other side, each of us explained what we had seen or heard. I said I heard running footsteps. My other friend said she heard children giggling. Another said he thought he saw something leap in front of his torch beam before he turned it off. The final friend said her eye had spotted a white pipe on the wall and thought it was out of place. When she looked again, it had vanished. From a logical perspective, there are plenty of reasons for why the torches turned off. Figuring we had been the subject of a prank set by local kids, we investigated the tunnel's history a bit further than the first few stories we scratched upon on our first round of investigation. Turns out, 2 kids had died in the tunnel during a massive storm. The mother had searched for them during the same storm, but drowned outside the tunnel in a flash flood. Local stories said sometimes the ghost of children will rush you in the tunnel, and the mother can be spotted climbing the interior walls, i.e., the white pipe may have been one of her limbs. I went to college in Moorhead, Kentucky, and this was back in 2017. There was this old mining cave system called the Mushroom Mines. They aren't used anymore, but it's a hot spot for spooks and exploring. People always say crazy stuff goes down there, like rituals, but I only believe the occasional drug deal or something. Someone said police found a goat cut in half down the center of its face, but I never saw evidence of that, so I don't believe it. Anyway, my friend Teddy and my boyfriend at the time decided to go to the caves around 2 or 3 p.m. one afternoon after class. I can't remember who, but I think we had 1 or 2 other friends with us, Maybe Teddy's friend, because I honestly can't remember. When we got there was another car parked outside the caves, and it seemed like it didn't belong to anyone crazy. It was a lime green little thing, clean as what we could see with the windows rolled down, maybe because it was hot, and they didn't want to turn on the AC. No one was around. That wasn't really weird though, because there are a lot of hiking trails next to the cave. No one was in the mouth of the cave, so we assumed they must have been hiking. As we're exploring the mouth of the cave, going about 10 to 20 feet deep, because if you've been in a mine or a cave that isn't in use anymore, you know it's pitch black and cold. We had flashlights, but weren't exactly wanting to go in miles or anything. When out of the blue, Teddy asks if we saw something. This immediately sent a chill down my spine, and I instantly assume he's just trying to scare us. My boyfriend goes to where he's standing and asks what he saw. As Teddy is explaining that he thinks he saw a small light come from down the cave, way deeper down, the small light clicks on, way further than we are down in the cave, as if reacting to his acknowledgement. It was a light from a flashlight. It clicks back off, and we take a second, and we get the hell out of there. So guys, I don't know what the hell to think at all. They didn't have their own light when we first showed up. So what were they? Just hanging out down there in the dark. They didn't say hi to us or speak out at all. It's just weird. It seems like they almost tried to get our attention instead of just calling out and greeting. They also had no idea that we were coming. We had all skipped our afternoon classes, and most students or working people probably wouldn't be there till about 5 or 6. I'd love to hear what you guys think. Obviously, I haven't gone back since. I live in southwest Spain, near a really ancient forest, which has some kind of trees that are almost extinct and only grow here and in a few other places. It's a bit of a rocky terrain, and if you ever are walking on the forest and try to climb some rocks, you should really be careful, because usually there can be caves and hollow spaces under your feet, and it's quite easy to fall to your death. My father and his friends usually go hiking on Thursdays, so they don't find anyone in the woods besides maybe a shepherd or a forest worker. And on this day they decided to climb a really large and rocky hill. My uncle Frank remembered that when he was young he slept on a little cave and went hunting and got lost, and they wanted to try and find that cave. A few hours later, they find it. It was covered in moss and grime, but it was surely the same one. One of my father's friends, John, tried to go as far as possible into it, because he was in really good shape and wanted to see it. John went in. The rest of them waited outside. Suddenly, John began screaming and calling for my father. He went in and turned on his torch. Inside the cave was a really weird shrine, with candles, 2 apples, bones, pieces of coal and ash on the ground, a pair of gloves, a pot, a pan. Everything looked really old and dusty. It was clear it hadn't been used in a long time. My father went to the shrine. It had a little bowl, and when he looked inside there was something that appeared to be human teeth in it. When they got out, they packed up all their things and got the hell out of there really fast. My father refused to hike around the area anymore, and they started hiking on the other side of the hill and into the woods. All of this was really strange, and I'd never heard of anything like this before. I don't know anything about voodoo or this kind of thing, but my father said it looked like some voodoo shrine. If anyone has any idea what it could be, I'd appreciate enlightenment. I'm an avid caver from West Virginia, and there's this cave not far that's been one of my favorites to explore. It's often my go-to cave to take friends to, as well as newcomers to get them into caving, as it's a rather easy, accessible one to get to, and not that challenging. despite being a rather large cave system. The first thing to note is that there's never any wildlife seen in or near the cave, and I've only ever seen very few bats for as large of a cave as it is. The first really strange thing to happen to me and my friends was stumbling across a pentagram made of salt with a dead bird in the middle, circled by some what seemed to be freshly burnt out candles. Obviously it was freaky, but we took it to be a prank by some teens or something along those lines. I've always been very comfortable going through this cave and leading treks, but up until now, I've always been with a group of friends. One day, I decided to take my girlfriend though, so just me and her. We didn't make it past the first chamber because I had such an uneasy feeling and just felt like I needed to get out of there. My way of describing the feeling was like one of being watched on steroids. I've been in some sketchy places, but I've never had that sense of dread in all my life. The next thing to happen is when a group of us friends went and stumbled upon a newer-looking jacket far back in the cave that was never there before. I wouldn't have taken it to be so odd. It seemed to be a rather expensive jacket, with no apparent damage or reason to just leave it randomly lying this far back in this part of the cave. There was also no one else around at this time. The next thing to happen was when a group of us friends were exploring, and on the way back, one of my most serious friends just seemed really strange and off. Finally, I asked him if he was good, and he nodded and quickly told me to just keep moving. Once we got out of the cave, he pulled me aside in private, which is really not like him, but he told me he didn't think it was a good idea to go back in there. I finally convinced him to tell me why, and he told me he swore he saw a person back there. From what he could see, it was a very pale and lanky person. He couldn't quite make it out at first, but he noticed it was following us. He even tried calling out a few times, but we didn't think anything of him doing it at the time, as it's fun to yell and make echoes. After this experience, I convinced the same friend to go back with me, along with our other buddy, to reach an extremely difficult place that I haven't been able to get to yet, seeing as I've been taking newbies. As we arrived at the cave, there was a man and a woman camping nearby who were standing at the entrance. We made friendly conversation and asked if they were going in. They said no and they were just checking it out. So then we continued on. After reaching our goal and being at the dead end of a very tight spot, we laid and rested for a while. Then we heard people. We all heard it at the same time, as we looked at each other and squinted. We couldn't quite make out what they were saying, as it was very distant and echoed, and muffled. But we could clearly make out that it was English, male and female voices, and we heard laughter, water splashing, and we thought it was pretty odd. It was in the morning. We didn't expect anyone else to be around. But there were those two campers, so we figured it must have been them. We were exhausted and rested for quite a good while and shut off our lights to save battery. We remained quiet, and as we were resting, and after a while we couldn't hear anything anymore. Then we went ahead and made our way back out of the cave, and as we exited, the man and the woman were still there by the entrance. My friends asked, "So you decided to go in after all?" The man replied, "No, why?" We asked if anyone else had been in or out, and they said they hadn't seen anyone the entire time. At this point we were creeped out, as we all clearly heard voices, but we didn't really talk about it amongst each other. Much later, while I started doing research, I started putting things together in my head and realized my friend's description as being very Wendigo-esque, and then I recalled how Wendigos are known for being able to imitate human voices to lure their prey, and it creeped me out. I almost wouldn't believe what he said he saw, but if you just understood the person I'm talking about, he's not someone to ever just make up something like that. I hope you found this interesting. I'm not sure where the witchcraft would tie in, but it's definitely worth mentioning that I later talked to another caver friend of mine who, before I could ever mention, told me they had found a pentagram similar to the one I described later in the exact same cave at a different time. I once found myself in a cave, along with 8 or 9 other people. It was the middle of the Pennsylvania wilderness, and the only entrance was a small hole in the ground. To enter, you had to sit on your ass, grab a tree root, and drop about 7 feet down a steep wall to the floor. We all dropped in, and spent at least half an hour exploring this cave. My friend Dan taps me on the shoulder and whispers, "Dude, look at the ceiling." The ceiling was just high enough above our heads to hide the thousands of spiders crawling around it. We tried to keep quiet about it, because we didn't want anyone to flip out, but there was no stopping it. Just seconds later, the whole group noticed them. Everyone got silent, and you could actually hear the spiders crawling on the surface of the stone. It was an extra nerve-wracking situation, because the only way to exit the cave was to jump up and pull yourself out of a hole surrounded by spiders. 2 of the girls with us were terrified and refused to climb out. They just couldn't muster the courage to put their faces next to a giant spider's nest. They came around though, and everyone got out safe. I had the honor of being the last to exit, alone in a dark cave filled with spiders, and nobody around to give me a boost. Fortunately, Dan was brave enough to reach down and give me a hand. When we first discovered the cave, we were like, I can't believe we've never heard of this place. And now, I know why. A few months later, I found out the cave is off limits in the fall because of the rattlesnakes. My family is very British. They came to America right at the end of World War I. I never asked why, because from what my mum told me, it hurts for them to talk about. We are so British, in fact, that not only does my grandfather still say God save the Queen, even though having been born in the States, now being from this family who thinks they're from the UK, we carry a lot of stories and legends over. One of these was the story of the Tommyknockers. The Tommyknockers are allegedly the souls of miners or spelunkers who were killed in the caves or mines they worked in, that either collapsed or that they got stuck in. They are said to either try and kill people in the mines or caves by hammering at support beams or integral rocks in the structure to try and cause it to collapse. Some people also believe that the knocking is a warning when a cave or mine is about to collapse in on itself. And now for my story. My grandparents used to own a lot of land. I can't say where, but know that they had a cave that may or may not have been a mine at some point. My cousins and I used to be very mischievous and basically were entertained by disobeying our grandparents. They always told us to stay out of the cave. They said it was very dangerous and that the Tommyknockers might get us. My oldest cousin at the time of 13 said that we should try and take a camera in and find some of the alleged Tommyknockers. They took my grandmother's camera and we ran into the cave when they were asleep, as it was early in the morning. We came to the mouth of the cave, and my cousin said that we had to be quiet so that we could hear the knocks. And I know you guys are going to call bull, but he set the damn camera down on the ground and left it there, so we have no proof. We walked into the cave and climbed down into the opening and began walking without saying anything. After about 10 minutes, we began to hear a faint tap, and my cousin told us to shut up and listened. The tapping turned into knocking, which turned into pounding. It seemed like it was right inside the walls of the cave, and we ran out of the cave so fast you wouldn't even believe it. A few days later, after we had gone home, my aunt told me that the cave had collapsed. This took place when I was 12. My dad owned a motorhome and we often went camping. This particular time my dad and I went camping and I took one of my best friends, Violet. For some background on how this place was set up, it was off a main road. There was a road where on one side there was a large campground, and on the other side there was a forest area. In the forest area there was a hiking trail that was about a half-mile long, and in the middle of the trail there was a creek and a large concrete tunnel. On the last night we were going to be staying there, I finally convinced Violet to go walking the hiking trail with me since she refused to go the other times. I asked my dad, and he wouldn't let me go alone. I wanted to go when it got dark because I thought it would be fun. Violet, on the other hand, didn't think it would be fun going in the dark. I just brushed it off and called her a pussy. My dad didn't want us going out if it got too dark, so we waited until dusk. We got some flashlights and headed out. We entered the forest, and I had a headlamp, and Violet had a large flashlight. I was walking in front since the trail was only just big enough for one person at the time, and she was very paranoid and wanted me to go first. We walked until we got to the creek, and there was a large, square-shaped concrete tunnel at the beginning of it. Because I wasn't really afraid of much, I wanted to go inside. I had tried to convince Violet to go in with me, but she refused multiple times. "Come on, it's just a tunnel. What's the worst that could happen?" I asked. But she was really paranoid about the whole thing and said, "No way. You can go if you want, but I'm staying out here." I eventually gave up and went in alone. I was about 5'8", and when I got inside the tunnel, I had to crouch down quite a bit to avoid hitting my head. There was water on the floor that ran into the creek, but there wasn't enough to get my shoes wet. There was a lot of graffiti all over the walls. I shone my headlight all over and did the best I could to read it. At this point I was about 15 feet down the tunnel from the entrance, and while I was distracted, reading all of the stuff on the wall, I didn't pay attention to anything else. But suddenly Violet began yelling at me. She was yelling stuff like, "Get out of there, hurry, let's go." I knew she was paranoid, but I didn't know that she was scared. I was going to go back, but before I did I took one last look around the tunnel, looked down the far end, and there, at the end, was a 40-year-old man that looked homeless. He was very skinny, his skin almost grey. I looked at him as he was slowly approaching me. I was absolutely scared out my mind. I ran out the tunnel as fast as I could, and because my curiosity always got the best of me, once I got out the tunnel I looked back, and he was just standing at the entrance looking at me. I wasn't sure how he got there so fast, but he did. When I first saw him, he was at least 20 feet down from where I was, and would had to have moved 35 feet down as fast as I had moved 15. And I didn't hear him run, because the water would have made a sound. But seeing him there, 5 feet away from me, was enough to make me run, and I ran faster than I ever have in my life. I was absolutely terrified. I can say with confidence neither me nor Violet slept that night, and to this day I've never told my dad about what happened. And Violet asked me to never bring it up again, and I still have no idea how he got to me that fast. I really wish I had listened to my friend, and I will never know for sure. But I believe that man had been living in that tunnel for God knows how long. And to this day, I'm still curious to what was at the end. I worked in a salt mine under Lake Erie a few years ago, and generally speaking, when things are brought down, they're never brought back up. It takes a lot of time to disassemble everything up top, secure and cover the parts, and put it back together down below, and vice versa. So there's tons of old trucks, tractors, and countless other things lined up on the far side of the mine. In the 80s, the University of Michigan and Cal Irvine were studying proton decay and trying to capture measurements. when it actually happened. Conducting this experiment topside is problematic because of cosmic rays and other forms of interference, so the mine was chosen as 2,000 feet down the Earth, absorbs pretty much anything. So they dug out a pool, about 80 by 70, filled it with 2.64 million gallons of purified water, and put fancy cameras and other equipment along the side. They had a whole shop, lab, and drive center down there. And eventually the grant money ran out after a few years, so the mine threw up some caution tape on the main steel door leading to the study, and that was that. Fast forward 20 years and I'm working there as an electrician, and I get a job to fix some big conveyor motor drive, so I set off to try and cannibalize some parts off old equipment. I remember one of the old-timers telling me there's a bunch of abandoned equipment in an area by the Kepi lift, which is the main elevator. I get over there and find a big steel door hanging off its hinges, with some very old caution tape lying on the ground. The whole study had to be accessed through this one door, which was dug into the wall. So after a while, the earth slowly crushes, bends, and pushes the ground up. After several tries, I yank the door open and step inside only to crap myself when I see a full scuba outfit, wetsuit, mask, belt, gloves, hanging 3 feet inside. So I collect myself, somehow find I didn't actually defecate my pants, but how I'll never know, and go inside, past the goddamn scuba dude. Everything inside was left exactly how it was 20 years ago. Coffee cups left out, day planners, job schedules, along with tons of scuba gear, oxygen-filled tanks, and computers. I make it about 10 feet-ish to the edge of the pool, and it's hard to see if the water's still in it, because there's no wind to move it. But eventually I see there's 60 plus feet of pure water in an absolutely dark pool. The sight of a huge black pool in a huge black hole in the ground, lit only by the small amount of light my camp light put out, and the absolute silence of being underground made me feel really uncomfortable. So I left in a hurry. That place really creeped me out. My grandpa got lost in Mammoth Cave after he got back from World War II. Apparently before he was drafted it was not a national park, and the rules around exploring it were very loose. The property it was on was privately owned, and locals were known to trespass and explore the cave, or that's what my grandpa used to tell me. He and his friends very well may have been the only people trespassing. While my grandpa was serving in the Pacific Theater, the cave became a national park. After arriving home, my grandpa and his friends that survived the war went back to explore for old time's sake. They were wandering around with a flashlight when they heard a tour group. Considering that they weren't in there legally and had bypassed many federal trespassing signs, they cut the lights and slowly but surely tried to walk unnoticed back to the entrance. Unfortunately, they went deeper and spent 17 hours in there before getting out. He didn't have many stories because apparently you inch along in complete darkness without being able to see your hand in front of your face. But he said one of his friends kept saying, "We didn't survive that crap to die in here." Let me take you back a few years, before the boredom that was the pandemic. This all happened at a barbecue. Remember those? My friend was having his annual barbecue. It was a beautiful summer's day, and we were all getting absolutely filled with delicious food and a little bit drunk. I'm not ashamed to admit it. While it was still light out, being the summer, my friend, the host of the party, talked about a cave in the distance. We all inquired about what was so special about the cave, and he told us that this cave in particular is said to have been the site of some pretty gruesome stuff in the past, in the war times, and that because of it, they had to put grates on the entrance. All of us lads called absolute bull and wanted to see this cave for ourselves. My friend, the host, really wanted to go exploring it, as he was convinced there was something worth seeing inside, So in our tipsy bravado, we all fetch what equipment we can to go exploring before dusk. We grab a handful of torches and start taking the 2-mile walk across random fields until we get to a small area. It was a bit like a forest, a tiny forest nestled between about 4 or 5 different fields. We get in and start looking around for the cave. My friend is ahead of us, guiding us through this little clearing, when he takes us down a hole. He explains that he believes this hole had been made by a bomb thrown during World War II. And that is when we find the grills. Nowhere near as impressive as I had originally thought. I was expecting the gates to Hogwarts or some huge thing like that, but this was a grill about 4 or 5 feet by 4 or 5 feet. Barely big enough for someone to squeeze in all honesty. We said, "Is this it?" And he goes on to tell me that he had heard in the pub from other locals that apparently horrific things had happened here and that it used to be a research facility in the war. We all called rubbish. When we went in, we were still feeling the buzz of the party and of the alcohol, turned on our torches and started walking in, taking a look around. It smelled damp and of animal feces. We kept on going. From a small entrance, it started to get quite bigger, to a space about the size of an average living room. As we kept going, the tunnel was getting darker, unsurprisingly, and our torches were the only source of light. We looked around. The tunnel was cut into the earth and looked like it hadn't been disturbed in an extremely long amount of time, save for the animal feces. That is when we saw something. Something was reflecting off our light. We approached it cautiously, nervous to whatever could be down there. As we got closer and shone our torch more at it, did we realize it appeared to be a door handle. There was a door in a cave underground. Things were starting to get interesting. As we approached the door handle, the group of us all shone our lights at the door. Surely this would be locked. Were we prepared for such an eventuality? As my friend gently brought down his hand to the handle, he pulled it down, and unsurprisingly, it opened. We were all pretty happy. The door creaked open loudly, very ominous in the echoey cave. As we shined our lights, inside there appeared to be a room. This one was not made of earth, but appeared to have been made of wood, at least from the inside. Almost like someone had slotted a container with a room in it, dropped it in the ground and then filled it in. Who knows, maybe that's what happened. We started exploring. Whoever was here last had left in a hurry. There were papers, pencils, a filing cabinet, all kinds of stuff underneath the ground, and no one had ever known about it. Well, had the balls to explore it, should I say. The people who had left had certainly done so in a hurry. One of the cups of what I assumed was tea was on the ground and had actually stained the floor from where it had spilled. We weren't getting good vibes. What was this place about? We started reading some of the documents, and it definitely appeared to be from the government. We were all quite excited, but there was no treasure in here. It was just a single room. My friend started moving things around, inside the filing cabinet and such, when he pulled back a filing cabinet, and that is when he saw another grate, but this one was open. That's weird. Not cut. The grate had been propped open and was hidden behind this filing cabinet. This was just getting creepier. So one of my friends, Dan, dares someone to squeeze in. The hole was a little bit smaller than the original one, but I was fairly confident most of us could make it through. I, as Dan didn't want to, poked my head in first, scared that some land shark was going to come and bite my head off. As I turned on the flashlight and poked it around on either side, the tunnel continued. This was still made of earth, and what appeared to be another shining object in the middle towards the top. Could it be another door? Excitedly, the rest of us started making our way. What treasures? What the hell could be hidden down here? And why was it locked up and abandoned in such a hurry? Our brains were going crazy with government conspiracies and wartime nonsense. The things that they'd done in secret, human testing, stuff like the Russian sleep experiment, no doubt. All in a quiet town in rural England. We all squeezed through the hole and began approaching it carefully. It was only a short walk, and this time, when I tried the handle, it opened again. We shone our flashlight into the room, but this one smelled much worse, much mustier. It was pretty unpleasant, and I wasn't feeling so great. This room was very different from the other, with a single chair in the middle of the room, and writing all over the wall. What the hell had this been? The writing was unintelligible, in a variety of different colors. We were all astounded as to what the hell could have happened here that everyone decided to leave so quickly. We thought someone might have been locked in, but the door was unlocked. Maybe we were going to find a body. Sadly, there didn't appear to be another door here, so we were all fairly confused as to what was just going on down here, and why the solitary chair. It didn't really make much sense. So, in the end, we decided to leave it. Just as we were leaving, though, did one of my buddies, Ben, notice something on our return. Where the entrance via the hidden filing cabinet was, there was actually a small slit to the right, barely noticeable and barely big enough for a person to squeeze through. We all looked at each other and knew that we had to do it. Lawrence was the thinnest between us, so we asked him if he wouldn't mind shining the flashlight and checking out what was in this third secret tunnel. As he took the torch, he began to squeeze through the narrow gap, torch hanging from his hand. He made it through without much effort, and when on the other side, he just said, "Oh my God," and started coming back. Of course, this just led to a barrage of questions. What are you talking about? Why are you saying that? We all in turn started to make our way in. That is when we found the third door. But this one had a glass panel, unlike the rest, and when we shone our torch into it, we could see what appeared to be a person sitting at a table facing us. Everyone jumped out their skin. But eventually, when we calmed down and noticed in the light that it didn't move, did we approach the door, go to open it, but this time it was locked. There was no key anywhere in the ground or the dirt, so we shone the torch in and just stared at it. My friend was convinced it was a mannequin. It didn't appear to have any bones or anything. It was just so unnerving to see this thing propped in a chair, as it gave us a right scare. We looked in and could see there was a door behind it, but as there was no key, and as it was getting dark outside, and the spook frightening us a considerable amount, we decided to leave the exploration for now. It's been a few years, and we haven't gone back to finish the exploration, but I often fantasize and wonder about what the hell that is and why it's down there. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. I do hope that you enjoyed tonight's Stories Underground. certainly left me with an unsettling feeling. And as I said at the start, if you would like to play some really cool escape rooms in London, check out the link in the description. These guys are awesome and I think you'll all really love it. If you're in the London area. And if you're planning on going soon, it's definitely a good way to spend your time. Cultural, probably. Alright then guys, I'd like to offer a huge thanks to my lovely members and patrons. You guys are amazing and I love you and thank you so much for all your support. It really is invaluable. So I'll see you Friday then guys. Stay awesome and I'll see you in the next one.